Bourgeoisie produces, above all, art zone. Gravediggers.
Hey folks, it's your Das Criminal for the week.
This is Erin in Seoul, Korea.
And this is Amr in Toronto, Ontario.
And this is the first time we're doing a Korea-based case, so that's very exciting considering that I live here. But I'm also a bit nervous as I am here on a very conditional visa, so...
Yeah, we don't want to get into too much trouble with the authorities. I certainly enjoyed researching it, and Korea is a lot weirder than I thought it was. I mean, I already thought it was weird, but the whole thing we're going to get into is a strange phenomenon.
Yeah, I first heard about this back in February or March, maybe, sort of as it was happening, but I had no idea how deep it actually went. I bet a lot of our listeners are kind of on that same page. Also, we wish this was episode 31 because it's patient 31, but we literally plan each week as it happens, so sorry about that.
Yeah, we certainly don't have the foresight to plan that ahead.
In December of 2019, a new infectious disease was identified in Wuhan, China, which eventually became known as Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, or COVID-19. Now, almost 10 months later, oh my god, the world continues to deal with a global pandemic. At the time of recording, mid-October 2020, there have been over 38 million confirmed cases of the infection and over 1 million deaths from the disease. As we've all observed, different countries have handled the outbreak in different ways and with varying degrees of success. Here in the Republic of Korea, known to most as South Korea, initial efforts to test, contact trace, quarantine, and treat successfully kept infections down to only a couple dozen cases.
Yeah, I remember when the pandemic first started, a lot of press here used Korea as a model. Apparently, there were like drive-through checks, like you could check if you have COVID through drive-throughs and stuff. And a lot of people here were like, why can't we be like Korea?
Yeah, during the first month or so of the pandemic, only 30 people in Korea were found to have been infected, and pretty much all of those people had either been in Wuhan or had come into direct contact with someone who had. Then came Korea's very own Typhoid Mary, patient 31. Through behavior that many would consider irresponsible, like refusing to socially distance despite displaying symptoms, Patient 31 became the source of a cluster of around 5,080 confirmed cases within the next month. When I first heard about this story back in February or March, I thought what most of you are probably thinking. It's terrible that one person's recklessness or foolish behavior led to the infections of so many others. Each death by this virus is a tragedy, and our responsibility to protect each other by following health guidelines should not be taken lightly. But the story of how Patient 31 was able to infect so many people and the legal and political consequences of this cluster in Korea are much heavier than I initially understood. Prepare yourself for hotel buffets, religious persecution, and the second coming of Jesus Christ as we tackle the case of South Korea's Patient 31. South Korea has experienced pandemics before, and was thus more prepared for an outbreak of an illness like COVID-19 than many other countries. They had SARS in 2002-2003 and MERS in 2015.
Also from my observations, and I don't mean to like generalize or anything, but it seems that like East Asian culture is a lot more receptive to things like mask wearing in general. I mean, I remember when I was in university, Asian students would always wear masks if they were sick with the flu or something. So, I mean, it seems that there is a culture or a idea of things like mask wearing without a lot of pushback.
Yeah, people also check the air quality index here and might wear masks accordingly because obviously, if there's a lot of pollution in the air, you can inhale that and get yourself sick. So I think we all should be behaving more like this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, through these previous pandemics, South Korea learned lessons like developing rapid testing, closing schools and workplaces, and disseminating public health announcements. So, public health announcements regarding COVID 19 are everywhere here. Like they're on billboards, they come up on your phone. On the Seoul Metro, there are these ads, and they have these adorable little cartoon bunnies who remind each other to wear masks and cover their mouths when they sneeze. It's so cute. It's also so Korea.
The bunnies also have like a cop bunny that finds the other bunnies if they don't abide by these regulations.
No, they just remind their friends to
That's
sneeze.
nice.
And I don't really speak Korean, but you can see them going, oh no, and rushing to their friend and showing them how to cover their mouth with their shoulder or their elbow.
That's very wholesome.
The first known infection of COVID 19 occurs on January 20th, 2020, when a 35-year-old Chinese national from Wuhan tests positive at Incheon Airport near Seoul. In the next week, 3 more travelers from Wuhan in their 50s are diagnosed. 2 of them are tested and confirmed right at the airport, meaning the infection is very contained. Another 3 patients are diagnosed, 2 more from Wuhan, and 1 who had dinner with one of those patients before the diagnosis. As we said, the Korean cluster at this point is still very small and contained. All people who recently visited Wuhan or had direct contact with someone who did.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention here that when you read in reports about things like community transmission, that's what they mean that like in Korea's case right now, there at this point in our episode, there was no community transmission. All the transmissions were traced back to travelers or people who interacted with travelers. So there was no direct community to community transmission.
And diagnoses continue this way only through close contact for a period of about a month. Patients are very strictly monitored by the government, and by February 16th, 2020, again, there were only 30 known cases in a country of over 50 million people. From the Washington Post, quote, nearly all local transmission was still among families and friends, end quote. For an infection as contagious as we now understand it to be, keeping rates down to 30 people total in Korea for almost a month is a pretty impressive feat.
Yeah, I mean, 30 and 50 million is damn near miraculous, if anything. I think the only other country that had rates similar to that is New Zealand. And New Zealand is like a distant island country. It has much easier task than Korea. But also, like I said, the drive-through testing. And also I heard that results in Korea come very quickly instead of 72 hours like here in Canada.
Well, also because of the DMZ and really pretty much no contact between North and South Korea is like an island in its own kind of way.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually, yeah.
I'll tell you just a little bit about my experience coming to Korea. So I had to submit health documents to the embassy in the United States to obtain my visa. Then I was temperature tested before my flight and again several times once I arrived at the airport. And I had to fill out several questionnaires just saying I didn't have any symptoms, asking the cities that I had previously been living in. At the airport, I was kind of shuffled from queue to queue to ensure I wasn't loitering anywhere and possibly spreading germs. Like I was always standing up in like a spread out distance queue, or I was talking to someone, like showing them my documents.
So there was no one like just sitting there, not doing anything, just hanging out. It seemed
Nope.
very efficient. Okay, yeah.
Then I was quarantined for 2 weeks completely by myself. So I was only allowed to leave one time to go to the medical center for a COVID test, which was a nose and throat swab. And they let me know my specific time, which is at like 2:15 in the afternoon or something. And I arrived on time, maybe 5 minutes before, and they did my test on time. Like there was no sitting around, no waiting. This was outside. They had tents set up outside the medical center just for this, like trailers, so you wouldn't get anyone inside sick in case you did have it.
That's really smart. Here in Canada, the testing centers are all like indoor clinics. You have to wait outside, but then they let you inside into like this building and you have to get tested.
Yeah, very efficient here. And I also had to download this government app and update it with my temperature and any symptoms twice a day. So I tested negative and I never had symptoms, and this wasn't really a problem for me. But the app also tracks your phone location. So if I had left the quarantine area, it would have immediately alerted the authorities and they would come find me.
Okay, I have really mixed feelings about this. Clearly, there is some level of public safety involved in which people have to sacrifice their individual liberties for the greater good. But there are a lot of privacy issues here that are prescient, and I'm very concerned with this data being stored and used somewhere. I'm really curious as to how legal frameworks will develop to incorporate this data into, health information laws that protect that information as part of your health information.
Yeah, it's also a bit weird because I am an immigrant, like a foreign national in a new country. So to know for the first 2 weeks, they knew exactly where I was and that I would be in trouble if I left was a little bit concerning. But I do understand the purpose with the pandemic. If there was no pandemic and they just tracked me, I wouldn't have come here. Like, that's way too far for me.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I just find it fascinating because I wonder how long they'll use that kind of tracking, or whether the pandemic will allow for the use of tracking even after vaccines are developed, a sort of normalization of the panopticon.
Well, once my quarantine period was up, it was up like September 4th at noon or something, a very specific time. So I was all excited. I went outside. I just went for a really long walk. Like, I just enjoyed being outside. But immediately, other people texted me and were like, delete that app off your phone right away because it continues to track you. And first, because my quarantine period is up, but if the app hasn't alerted the people that that's true, they don't want me to get in trouble for leaving, even though I'm allowed to leave. But also because no one wants the government to continue tracking them through an app on their phone.
Yeah, it's just very, very dystopian.
I will say as well, it was very difficult to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And I had my phone, like I FaceTimed friends and family. I had my laptop, so I had Netflix. I even had Zoom training for my job. Like, it's not like I was sitting in a jail cell. But the fact that it was so emotionally difficult for 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, really made me think about our incarcerated brothers and sisters and what they're going through.
Yeah, especially things like solitary confinement too.
Right. And like, again, there's no comparison. I'm not trying to be like, it was like jail. Like, it wasn't. But really just made me empathize with people who are stuck in solitary places for so, so long. So here in Korea as well, masks are mandatory in indoor and outdoor public spaces. My workplace was initially closed and we had to work on Zoom. And government officials would occasionally pop in to ensure that we were following the rules. For the first few weeks I was out of quarantine, public places like coffee shops, for instance, even had to contact trace for takeaway. So like if you got a coffee, even from a little tiny counter, you would have to write down your name and a phone number where they could find you in case there was a cluster outbreak there.
I guess that makes sense if one of the workers gets sick and, you can trace people based on that.
Yeah, or if someone that they know is sick visits there and touches all the straws or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
Cases are now dropping, so restrictions are slowly being lifted, but everyone expects rules like masks to remain in place for a very long time. The Korean government is arranging to make vaccines available once that is medically possible, and I do plan on getting a vaccine.
Yeah, same here. Canada apparently has ordered batches of vaccines from different developers and, it's free here. So as soon as it comes out, I'm definitely taking a vaccine.
Yeah, I think Korea is arranging plans for like 30 or 40 million of them, and there's like 52 million people here. So I think that's just the initial dose. They're obviously not going to vaccinate the few people who cannot be vaccinated for other medical reasons, but hopefully there's a vaccine with my name on it.
Yeah, same here. I'm half certain they're probably gonna release the vaccine in waves where the people who need it the most get it first, and then as more batches are released, people who are healthier get it.
So let's start talking about our girl, Patient 31. She was named Patient 31 because she was the 31st person in South Korea to be diagnosed with the coronavirus. We don't know specific details about her, like her real identity, as the Korean government conceals this information, but I have gleaned from Reddit posts that plenty of people know who she is, but it's illegal to print this information, as she and her medical privacy must be protected. And Amr and I are totally on board with this, by the way. Like, we're not trying to spill people's health information, of course.
Oh yeah, we're not funded by the Murdoch family. This isn't a Murdoch podcast. We're tabloids who just, spit out disgusting tabloid information.
We do see similar circumstances, though, in other cases where, for one reason or another, people involved cannot be named. So one thing that comes to mind for me is the two young boys who murdered Anna Kriegel in Ireland. They're publicly known as Boy A and Boy B, but people from their town know who they are because they've been convicted for murder and removed from public life. So I'm sure people around Patient 31 know who she is, but it's not meant to be printed. It's not supposed to be public information.
Yeah, which I think is ultimately a good thing.
So here's what we do know. Patient 31 was a 61-year-old woman at the time of her diagnosis. She's likely from in or around Daegu area, a city a bit south of the center of the country. So here's a quick timeline of what happened with Patient 31. On February 6th, around 10:30 p.m., Patient 31 is in a minor car accident in Daegu and checks herself into the Saronin Oriental Medicine Hospital the next day for treatment. As we'll see, she stays in the hospital for 12 days due to this quote-unquote minor accident, so it doesn't sound minor to me. But South Korea does have publicly funded healthcare for its citizens, so perhaps people are willing to actually use health services, unlike in the United States.
Do you know if South Korea also extends that public health to residents that are not citizens, like workers and so on?
I have to pay for part of my health insurance, so I assume no.
Ah, okay. All right.
But it could be on a visa by visa basis, because I have a specific type of visa for my job, but maybe if you are on a student visa or something, that might change.
That makes sense, yeah.
So on February 8th, Patient 31 drives herself home from the hospital to get some personal items and then returns. February 9th at 7:30 a.m., Patient 31 attends a 2-hour church service at the Shincheonji church in Daegu. February 10th, Patient 31 develops a fever. February 15th, doctors at the Saronin Oriental Medical Hospital urge Patient 31 to be tested for the coronavirus as she has symptoms like a high fever, but she refuses.
I feel like testing should be legally mandatory at this point. Like a legal, you have to do it or something.
I don't know if it's even mandatory now for Korean citizens. It's definitely mandatory for me because I'm a foreigner, but I'm not totally sure how it works.
Yeah, I think it's mandatory for people coming into Canada, but I don't think it's mandatory for people in Canada. Like, if you're here, there's no way they can force you to get a test, which I think is insane. There should be repercussions for not being tested.
So this same day, February 15th, as doctors are urging her to get tested for the coronavirus, Patient 31 leaves the hospital by taxi and travels to the Queenville Hotel for a buffet lunch. Now, I am very anti-hotel restaurant bar unless you are staying at the hotel or there is a specific reason to be there, like a spectacular view or you have a friend that works there, something like that. They are very overpriced, in my opinion, and buffets particularly are unsanitary. So I am judging Patient 31 both for refusing to be tested and for willingly eating at a hotel buffet in the city where she lives.
I absolutely agree. I have strong feelings about this as well. Buffets are awful in the best of times. Like, even pandemic aside, buffets are just awful. During a pandemic, they're outright dangerous and, in my opinion, should just be banned. And also, in my experience, the food at buffets is never great. It's never good. I'd rather go to a restaurant that specializes in one particular kind of cuisine where you sit down and pick a meal than a buffet where it seems generalized, but at the same time, there's nothing good there. That being said, I do want to say that I don't mind hotel bars, mainly because my experience, the hotel bars have either great views and or a great ambiance, though they are overpriced for sure.
A rooftop hotel bar or something like that makes sense to me because you are going for the experience, the views. But like, if there are a bunch of bars in the area and someone says, oh, let's go to this one, which is on like the ground floor of a hotel and just has a regular ambiance, no.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
On February 16th, the following day, patient 31 attends church again for 2 hours. February 17th, around 3:30 p.m., patient 31 takes a taxi to a public clinic to get tested for coronavirus. She is also transferred from the Saronin Oriental Medicine Hospital to the Daegu Medical Center. On February 18th, patient 31's test comes back positive for COVID-19, and the government begins contact tracing. Only days after patient 31's diagnosis, the number of confirmed positive cases in Korea skyrocketed from just a few dozen to over 1,000. As the KCDC continued contact tracing and testing, they ended up finding a cluster of over 5,000 COVID-19 cases, which could be traced back to patient 31.
I wonder if she feels guilty about that. I wonder if she has any sort of feelings of guilt or anxiety.
Well, Koreans hate this lady. They really do.
In that case, I'm really happy that her information is private because I'm pretty sure there'll be a lynch mob outside her house.
A sort of lynch mob does form, but not exactly for patient 31, as we'll go on to see. So when I first heard about South Korean super spreader patient 31, I thought, as most of you probably are, damn, that's really unfortunate. An old church lady's initial refusal to get tested and socially distance led to over 5,000 infections. And it does go to show that one person can have an impact on the spread of the virus. If you think you are sick, stay home. Just stay home. Don't go to church. But patient 31 wasn't just an old church lady. She was, and perhaps continues to be, a member of the Shincheonji, Church of Jesus Christ, the Temple of the Tabernacle of the Testimony, otherwise known as SCJ or just Shincheonji, an organization which many Koreans consider a religious cult. Korea is actually a hotbed for cults. It has so many that there's even an anti-cult movement here.
Yeah, during my research for this episode, I accidentally fell into a trap of researching cults and Korean cults particularly, and the most notable of which is Sun Myung Moon and his Unification Church, where apparently him and his wife are seen by the followers as, quote, true parents, and just genuinely a disturbing cult all around, but made even weirder because Moon has a close relationships with Nixon, both Bushes, Louis Farrakhan, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Kim Il-sung. And from my cursory readings, it seems that Moon's church sort of proliferated due to covert US support because Moon was sort of virulently anti-communist, and the church became a vehicle for anti-communism in South Korea. And also, just to wrap it all up, Moon ended up being charged in the US for tax evasion, which is goes hand in hand with cults.
Yeah, there is a lot of research being done, and definitely if you are interested in this kind of stuff, a lot of research yet to be done on how Protestant Christianity grew really rapidly following the Korean War, which was from 1950 to 1953. And the post-war environment really created conditions in which cults and religious fringe groups could thrive. 2 million Koreans out of about 51, 52 million are involved in these religious fringe groups. That's a really high number. That's like 4% of people, which maybe doesn't sound that high, but if you know 50 people, one or two of them are probably in a cult. That's high.
It definitely means there's someone in your social circle who's in a cult, and it's just bizarre.
I would say that these groups are somewhat visible here. Like they do some regular recruiting tactics, like having people hand out flyers near the subway. But you pretty much see this stuff in any major metropolitan area. Like if you live in New York or DC or Toronto or something, every once in a while near the subway, there's like the Black Hebrew Israelites or some other kind of like fringe religious organization doing their thing.
Yeah, we have those here, especially on Yonge Street.
Of course, what we refer to as a fringe religious group might sound somewhat subjective. This is a quote from our favorite brain eater, Reza Aslan. Quote, "The Roman Empire referred to Judaism as a cult. Some say that certain versions of Islam are cults. Nowadays, most scholars prefer the word New Religious Movement, or NRM." End quote.
I'm going to paraphrase a much more intelligent person, i.e. Max Weinreich, the linguist. He was distinguishing between languages and dialects when he said this, but I'm going to paraphrase it to apply to religions and cult. He says, a religion is a cult with an army and a navy. For him, it's a language and a dialect, but for me, it's religions and cults.
Many contemporary religions began as cults, but eventually integrated into the fabric of society as they grew. Islam, for example, began with some Meccan guy named Muhammad receiving messages from God and his ragtag band of followers. Please, if you haven't yet, give Amer's Radio War Nerd series a listen because it goes into really great detail on all of those events.
Thanks for the plug.
Let's first talk about cults in general before diving into Shincheonji and how it meets many of the definitions for a cult, or at least a new religious movement. It literally says on the Shincheonji Wikipedia page that it is a Christian new religious movement. American sociologist and cult expert Yanya Lalick explains, quote, "Broadly speaking, a cult is a group or movement with a shared commitment to a usually extreme ideology that's typically embodied in a charismatic leader." End quote. Most cults share some basic characteristics. They require a high level of commitment from their members. They maintain a strict hierarchy, separating low-level supporters and recruits from the inner workings. They claim to provide answers to life's biggest questions. And only through the cult and its leader can people achieve salvation. All others are wrong or misled. Cults also have a process to transform a new member into a full-fledged believer.
Yeah, and this process is actually quite slow because cults never dump their entire teachings onto recruits in one go. Instead, recruits are generally absorbed slowly through usually emphasizing mild ideas about how society should function and relating to recruits and their particular issues, but then really going hard for the indoctrination the longer the recruits are pulled into the cult's orbit.
Cults typically try to control their members rather than offering them a system of basic guidelines or a support system like most religions. They often discourage members from discussing membership in the organization with friends and family unless those people are recruiting. And from Lalick, quote, "Most importantly, a cult uses both formal and informal systems of influence and control to keep members obedient, with little tolerance for internal disagreement or external scrutiny." End quote. I have seen online atheists, like capital A atheists, saying things like, "Isn't this the same as any organized religion?" And no, it's not. New religious movements have something in common with mainstream religion in that they are religious, but it doesn't mean all religions fit the definition of a contemporary cult. Catholics, for instance, don't believe that the Pope is a messianic figure or prophet, and even Pope Benedict XVI said, "You don't have to be Catholic or even Christian to enter the kingdom of heaven." I agree that some people might become wrapped up in any religion to a degree that isn't healthy, and that some people use religion as a means to try and control people. But having some overly devoted followers doesn't make an entire religion a cult. In fact, I'd argue that an atheist pushing a multi-level marketing scheme is much more closer to a cult member than a cultural Catholic who only goes to Mass on Christmas and Easter.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. I think a lot of people get too hung up on the theological aspects of cults, but you're right. You nailed the point right there. And I think the fanatical obedience to an hierarchy, as seen in things like multi-level marketing schemes, and also certain political groupings like the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, the MEK, which is an Iranian opposition group that currently lives in the US and have an obsessive dedication to its leader, Maryam Rajavi, I believe. And these assemblages are much closer to cult than, a nominal Muslim who celebrates Eid once every year. I also think that most, if not all, religions begin as cults. So Jesus was definitely seen as a messianic figure, and Muhammad was a prophet, but one who spoke with the voice of God. And these religions began with a close circle of devoted disciples. And what strikes me personally is how cults evolve into religions through more complex organizations while also retaining particular personal freedoms and liberties. Reza Aslan, again, our favorite brain eater, he says that religions equal cults plus time. And I tend to agree with that insofar as religions are a result of cults that last multiple generations. And that gives the cult enough time to mellow out and be absorbed, I guess, like sort of absorbed by the existing state structures while shedding more extreme forms of ritual and practice and a sort of mellowing out of its moral proselytizing. And cults are also defined by a counterintuitive desire for exclusivity, whereas religions are okay with people converting en masse and in some cases encourage it. Cults are defined by a clique mentality in which there's a defined us and them, as well as an emphasis on exclusion within the cult, a sort of intra-cult exclusivity, in which members have to constantly prove their devotion to achieve a sort of internal advancement. There's a fixed internal hierarchy, and you have to compete with other cult members to fit into that hierarchy or to climb that hierarchy. And in contrast, religions tend to adopt a mantra where nominal conversion is enough to be included in the community. And there's no attempt to cut you off from pre-existing social circles. I mean, in most cases, religions will encourage worshippers to pray collectively, but then you go home from church or you go home from the mosque, and you're allowed to return to a personal life with family and friends who may not be of the same sect or religion as you, and that's perfectly fine. Whereas cults tend to control every aspect of your life, including socially isolating you.
Yeah, I think there are many, many, many valid criticisms about religion and the control it might have on people's lives. Like, I'm an atheist and I am a woman, so not particularly liked among most religions, I might even say. But I feel like even Marx's quote about religion being the opiate of the masses is often taken out of context, because read in full, it's clear that Marx does criticize organized religion, but most of his disapproval is directed toward the inequities in society that abet human suffering. So we'll read the quote in full for you. Quote, "Religious suffering is, at one and the same time, the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. The criticism of religion is, therefore, in embryo, the criticism of that veil of tears of which religion is the halo." End quote.
I think that's a brilliant quote. I think it's often abused, especially the shortened version, it's the opium of the people or whatever. And I think Marx Marx is a great writer. We both agree on that, I hope. But in this particular instance, I think his analysis of religion misdirecting what should be anger at suffering or sort of refusal to accept suffering into a immobilizing, like a vehicle for immobilization in which people are paralyzed because religion offers a false happiness, i.e., suffering leads to reward in a second life or an afterlife.
There are definitely a lot of theological discussions to be had here, but I think it is important to draw that distinction between a religion and a cult. You can be critical of both, by the way, but my criticisms toward organized religion are slightly different than my criticisms toward cults.
Yeah, absolutely. There is an important distinction to be made.
So, what is Shincheonji, and does it meet the definition of a cult? Let's first take a look at the organization's leader, Lee Man-hee. Born September 1931, making him 89 years old now, Lee Man-hee joined the Tabernacle Temple religious organization in 1967 and left in 1971. From Wikipedia, quote, "Before founding his own religious movement, Lee was a member of a controversial group called the Olive Tree, a new religious movement which spawned the first countercult movement in post-war Korea, although his connection is not present in Shincheonji's biography of Lee." End quote. So first of all, please don't appropriate olive tree motifs for your religious cult. Olive trees are for peace and Palestine only. Thank you. Second, the leader of the Olive Tree organization preached that he was the Messiah and that he was immortal, but he died in 1990, so clearly that wasn't true. But Lee Man-hee definitely got some of his ideas from this group, and I think you actually see this kind of often in cults, where one follower starts to maybe realize that it's a cult and think to themselves like, well, I could do this. Other than that, not much is known about Mr. Lee. His background as a member of other religious fringe movements, however, makes it clear he's been in the game for a while. So let's take a look at the doctrine of Shincheonji. The first thing is that Lee Man-hee is the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Which I personally think is rather disappointing because he's not even creative enough to create an identity as a new Messiah. Instead, he has to appropriate an existing structure.
Yeah, we did go over this a little bit in our mini episode where we talked about Black Hebrew Israelites. And I think part of the appeal here is that you have a whole religion, a whole set of scriptures already set up for you in the Bible. You just have to interpret it your way. Like, actually, respect to Ron L. Hubbard of the Scientologists for writing his own book.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Like, applause. At least he didn't go the easy route. At least he created his own scripture.
According to Shincheonji, the Bible is written in secret metaphors that only Lee can correctly interpret. Lee is immortal and infallible. And on the day of judgment, Lee will take 144,000 Shincheonji members with him to heaven. And currently, Shincheonji has over 200,000 members in Korea alone, so apparently they're even competing for spots within the organization.
Yeah, that brings up the comment I made earlier regarding intra-cult exclusivity, where conversion is not good enough. You have to constantly prove your devotion to the leader and also compete with your fellow cultists for a sort of limited number of spots to achieve salvation.
So a lot of people were commenting on other things I read, why 144,000? And this is going to sound silly, but I think I have the answer.
Go on.
I think it's because 12 is a significant number in the Bible, like the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ. And the square of 12 is 144.
Yeah, that probably makes sense. I mean, yeah, that's a reasonable extrapolation.
Yeah, I should start my own cult with this kind of thinking.
Yeah, but I hope you write your own scripture. I mean, you're a good writer, so you should be able to write your own scripture.
We sometimes jokingly call our Patreon subscribers as a whole the Foucault fuck cult, so...
If you're a Patreon subscriber listening, welcome to the Foucault fuck cult, at least.
So, according to Shincheonji teachings, everyone who's not in Shincheonji will be denied forgiveness and destroyed. So, bad news for you and me, Amr.
Oh well.
There is a Korean YouTuber named Stella Kang, and she is a former member of Shincheonji, and she discusses how she was recruited and indoctrinated and involved and then eventually left the organization. So sources in our notes, as always. Definitely check out her YouTube channel if this is something that really interests you, because she goes into her personal story. And she also just seems like a really lovely person, like goes through it with empathy and understanding in a way that I found really enlightening. Members of Shincheonji wear identical uniforms and sit on the floor during worship services. They are discouraged, though not forbidden, from wearing face coverings like masks and even glasses, and they are encouraged to chant and sing loudly. Obviously, this is the exact opposite of how we should behave during a pandemic where the infection is spread through droplets.
Well, I don't know about you, but I guess I've been thinking of starting a worship group in which our rituals revolve around sitting in a circle and spitting into each other's mouths. And I think 2020 is the perfect year to follow my dreams.
According to Stella Kang, Shincheonji members often try to recruit people in other churches by hiding their association with Shincheonji and trying to meet people for Bible study. So other religious organizations like the Church of England in London have sent out warnings about this recruiting tactic. Shincheonji members will also befriend strangers, offering things like Korean classes to foreigners to earn their trust before trying to get them involved in the church.
Okay, I'm trying to imagine how that goes, and I can just imagine like a foreigner being like, I really appreciate the coffee and the Korean lessons, but I still don't understand why the first phrases I should learn are, I pledge allegiance to the Messiah Lee Man-hee and his teachings. Shouldn't I be learning like, where's the bathroom or something?
I mean, I think foreigners, though, are pretty vulnerable to cults because we don't have, like, our family here usually to tell us they're worried about us and things like that. Definitely easy targets.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
Stella says that Shincheonji come across as very friendly people. They take you out for coffee, they get to know you, they introduce you to other friends who are also part of Shincheonji, and doing this kind of bait and switch is a major red flag for a cult. Like, if you think you're just going out for coffee, going to hang out, and suddenly they spring this religious organization on you, definitely a bad sign.
Yeah, or if they try to sell you steak knives, that's another bad sign.
Recruits are also required to attend classes before they are actual Shincheonji members. So they must keep returning to get answers about life's questions, like next time we'll tell you, next time. And Shincheonji members are assigned to them to ensure that they're following the right path.
Yeah, that sounds like Alcoholic Anonymous, except the sponsors are for encouraging addiction to a feeling of social cohesion in this group, instead of, preventing addiction.
Members are discouraged from discussing Shincheonji with family and friends who might try to pull them away from the group. And if you don't feel comfortable telling your loved ones that you've joined a certain organization, that's another red flag. Also, getting sick is a sin because it prevents Shincheonji members from doing God's work, which helps to explain patient 31's reluctance to get tested and instead just continue going to church. In recent years, Shincheonji Church of Jesus has popped up in other countries, including India, New Zealand, and Singapore. Its base of operations in China is in none other than, you guessed it, Wuhan. And as it so happens, some of those original few dozen patients from Wuhan were also discovered to be associates of Shincheonji. Many members of the religious group attended the funeral of Lee Man-hee's brother in early February. While patient 31 denies being at that funeral, she was in Cheongdo, the area of the event at the time. There was also a smaller COVID-19 cluster at a Cheongdo hospital in late February. Thus, though the source of patient 31's infection is still unknown, I think it's becoming more and more clear that she wasn't Shincheonji's patient 0. Once the Korean public heard that patient 31 and the coronavirus cluster in Daegu were associated with Shincheonji, there was backlash against the church and its members. Now keep in mind, when patient 31 was going to church, religious gatherings were not yet banned by the Korean government. It wasn't until after the infection began spreading that the authorities restricted gatherings. A petition to dissolve Shincheonji received over 1 million signatures, and the government collected Shincheonji membership information and interviewed 230,000 members of the organization. 9,000 of those were showing symptoms of COVID-19.
9,000 from what was initially only 30 people with COVID-19 in Korea. That's a fucking big leap.
The most confusing part of this case is whether or not Shincheonji and Lee Man-hee cooperated with authorities trying to contact trace after patient 31's diagnosis. Lee originally blamed coronavirus on, quote, the evil who got jealous of Shincheonji's rapid growth, end quote. On March 2nd, Lee did a press conference where he bowed to the nation, saying, quote, I offer my word of deep apology to the people, end quote. He said he was remorseful that Shincheonji members had unintentionally spread the virus, and he claimed to be cooperating with authorities. The Vice Minister of the Ministry of Health and Welfare here in Korea has publicly stated that Shincheonji has cooperated with health authorities. But on the 31st of July, 2020, Lee Man-hee was arrested for allegedly hiding crucial information from contact tracers and other offenses. This doesn't align with the statements that he cooperated with health authorities.
Yeah, that strikes me as the Korean authorities realizing they fucked up and, I guess, looking for a scapegoat, maybe?
Yeah, that's kind of what it reads like to me. Lee was denied bail despite his deteriorating health condition, and prominent Korean legal scholars have stated that they feel this is not fair, that he is being unfairly persecuted. But I mean, if he's actually immortal...
Yeah, he'll just, breeze through it.
Yeah, and I hate to say it because I think Shincheonji does have some concerning cult-like qualities, at least from the readings we've done, but this does sound a bit like a witch hunt to me. As far as I can tell, restrictions on public gatherings had not been enacted when patient 31 went to church, and Shincheonji cooperated with authorities to contact trace. I think it's unfortunate that this happened, but if it weren't Shincheonji, it just would have been a more mainstream church, and I don't see how a crime was committed here.
Yeah, I mean, here in Canada, we're experiencing a second wave, and it's been fascinating because Ontario and Quebec particularly are hard hit, and they've currently banned a lot of activities, including things like gyms, indoor eating at restaurants, etc., etc., but they have yet to ban religious gatherings. So while you're not allowed to go to a restaurant to eat, you are definitely still allowed to go to church. And I mean, I find that interesting. But I also find it interesting because persecution to cults is like steroids, because nothing validates a cult's doctrine more effectively than, massive social and government persecution. And the cult leader can just turn around to his followers and say, well, what have I been telling you? Look at how these people are, angry at us, jealous of us, etc., etc.
I went to church a couple times when I lived in Dublin. Like I said, I'm an atheist, so this might seem counterintuitive for me, but it was at 11:30 on Sundays, which was the perfect time for hungover Aaron to go, and it forced me to put my phone away and have a little meditation time, if you get what I mean. So I was like, whatever, I'll just go to this church. And on Palm Sunday, this old man was slumped over, not responding, seemed to be having a significant medical emergency, could have died in church. And the woman in front of me was mad because as the priest was telling people, please leave through this exit so that the paramedics can come. I've already blessed the palms. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next week. But obviously this man's health is most important. The woman in front of me was upset because she didn't get to take communion on Palm Sunday.
Well, priorities seem to be different in different people, I guess. That's that's insane.
Putting your religious ritual, basically, communion is a ritual. And to Catholics, obviously, it means something. But even the priest himself was like, oh no, this man's health is obviously much more important than us passing a cup around.
Oh, I mean, even the episode we did regarding Jesus and his murder, I'm pretty sure from the research we did into Jesus, he would have encouraged medical help for that man instead of like being like, yeah, eat my flesh or whatever.
Yeah, that's the point that Eagleton makes, is that Jesus doesn't tell sick people to like get over it. He heals the sick.
Yeah, he doesn't even ask them for their insurance information.
Some members of Shincheonji have faced discrimination as members of the, quote, most vilified group during the pandemic, end quote. There has been online hate speech and expression blaming Shincheonji for the spread of COVID-19, which, I mean, typing on Reddit that you're mad at Shincheonji, I don't know if I consider that hate speech, so I don't know where they're really drawing the line here. But yeah, if people are threatening them and saying they should be hurt or killed or fired from their jobs, that's not nice. This is something weird to me. Quote, on February 26th, a female Shincheonji member was reportedly being attacked by her husband, who was trying to compel her to leave Shincheonji, and died after falling from her 7th floor apartment. On May 4th, a 42-year-old female Shincheonji congregation member who was a victim of spousal abuse, allegedly due to her affiliation with Shincheonji, died after falling from her 11th floor apartment. End quote. Isn't this just intimate partner violence, which has risen around the world during the pandemic? And honestly, I can see why a cult would be appealing to people enduring domestic abuse. It offers an escape, a possible salvation, and another community.
Yeah, it says here in the quote that the second woman was facing spousal abuse due to her affiliation with Shincheonji. And I feel like that's putting the cart before the horse, because if anything, I feel like she's been experiencing spousal abuse for a while, and Shincheonji offered a community that she was otherwise lacking.
Also, wholly victim blaming. Like, people do not beat their loved ones for any reason, but certainly not for being a member of a religion you don't like. You talk to them about it. Maybe if you think they care about this new religious movement or this cult more than you, maybe you get a divorce, like you move on with your life, but you don't beat them.
Yeah, that's just insane and, psychotic.
And also this whole like died after falling from their apartments thing while being abused by their spouses. Like that reads as absolute bullshit to me. They jumped or they were pushed.
That reminds me of the language they use to cover police shootings in the US. Like, an incident was recorded in which a bullet was dislodged from a weapon and found its way into the head of a boy. And, it's like, okay, but what happened? Like, who shot who?
It also frames it as like these women were trying to escape maybe and they fell. And like, again, that's spousal abuse. That's intimate partner violence.
Oh, yeah.
If you're cornered on your balcony or something and you fall, that's not the same as just like they fell because they were sitting on the railing, which is also tragic, but it's not the same.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. It's not like they just slipped and fell. They were escaping violence.
Also, I live on the 7th floor of my apartment building, and of course, all apartment buildings are different, but you could not fall out the window here. You'd have to make an effort to get yourself out the window. And if I'm remembering Amar's setup correctly, it's the same with you, Amar. Like, you would have to deliberately break the window to fall out of it.
Yeah, I don't even think the windows here are breakable. Like, they look way too thick. You'd have to, like, really throw something at it to get it to break.
Yeah, you'd have to get your drill out or something.
Yeah, or like a sledgehammer.
Human rights groups have spoken up about the oppression of the Shincheonji in the wake of COVID in Korea. Again, they might have a kooky leader, but being in a fringe religious group is not a crime. And being unknowingly exposed to a virus isn't a criminal offense either.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, I don't think people should be persecuted as such, but on the other hand, I feel like cults are dangerous, and we can have a discussion, not necessarily now, but we can have a discussion on whether cults are dangerous enough to prompt establishing a cult or leading a cult being criminalized. Whereas participating in one or being a member of one shouldn't be criminalized, if that makes sense.
My problem with the prospect of criminalizing cults is that the first thing a lot of countries would do, including the United States, would be to criminalize communes, socialist groups, anything like that. Who defines a cult?
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
Even though I think a lot of cults, like Nexium, for instance, very dangerous. Like people very much hurt, abused sexually. That's not okay. And I think those crimes should be prosecuted. Those people should face repercussions for those. I still don't think criminalizing cults themselves is the best idea because it would just be weaponized against religious minorities, political minorities, etc.
Yeah, you're right. I certainly don't trust the current existence of the current states to ban cults, I guess, in a productive way instead of using it to target political dissidents.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think we need to be forthright in acknowledging that religious gatherings, if not socially distanced, can spread the infection just like any other concert or wedding or sporting event. In Malaysia, for instance, one patient who attended large religious events for the Islamic missionary movement Tablighi Jamaat spread the virus to thousands of people. New York City is seeing a similar issue where ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects in Borough Park are reporting high rates of COVID-19. In the state of Israel, infection rates are highest among ultra-Orthodox sects as well. It has nothing to do with which religion a group practices, but the degree to which they socially distance versus holding large events. And we should direct similar criticisms toward any group which holds large gatherings, be they spring breakers or Trump rally attendees. Plenty of religious groups have held online or socially distanced services, and plenty of non-religious organizations have broken public health codes and infected other people. As we so often say on this podcast, it's about understanding systems and structures, not simply the individual who is patient 31. Making our world safer in the age of the pandemic takes a structural response. You can shut down all the cults in Korea, but without a serious communal effort toward keeping each other safe, it's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I also think that the proliferation of cults are a symptom of deeper problem that can be seen from churches in Korea to assemblages like the Proud Boys in the United States. And it seems to me that we live in an especially alienating time under capitalism, where we have become so atomized that we lack the most basic social bonds and cohesive community structures. I mean, humans are fundamentally social species. Homo sapien beat other ape species like Homo habilis and Neanderthals, largely due to cooperation and complex social structures. And I mean, right now, personally, I can't even tell you the names of my neighbors on my flat's floor, let alone any semblance of a community. And cults, I guess, provide that social sanctuary that's absent today. And moreover, a lot of cults succeed due to a combination of persecution from the state and provision of social services that the state fails due to austerity. And I'm thinking especially of the popularity of things like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, where Anwar al-Sadat's Infitah policies in the 70s gutted the social welfare state, and the Brotherhood filled that vacuum with their clinics, schools, childcare programs, so on and so forth. And, you know, when the state is unwilling to fulfill people's basic material needs, it's no surprise that extra state groupings grow exponentially. And in this, I think banning cults is beyond the point because without a systemic approach to social welfare, combined with a fundamental reconceptualization of work and labor, cults will retain an appeal in the society that we live in, marked with, you know, extreme alienation of labor.
I think that's a really great structural analysis. And I think it also goes back to the bait and switch we were talking about before. If you live in Cairo and you are very poor, and there is a group who every Saturday is giving you bread for free, you might become interested in who they are, what they're doing, what they believe. And if that's the Muslim Brotherhood, well, then that's a really easy way for you to get into their ideas.
Yeah, I mean, if the government or the state that's supposed to take care of its citizens isn't there for you, but the Muslim Brotherhood is offering you bread, and you know, the more you show up, the more they're like, "Oh, do you want a job? Yeah, my cousin has a pharmacy. You know, it could be a tech there. Do you want subsidized rent for your apartment, etc., etc." These things become a lot more appealing. You know, I don't blame people for being tempted.
I think there are a lot of factors as well that go into why cults and new religious movements are so popular in Korea. And I've only lived here for like 2 months, so I'm not going to paint myself as some sort of expert. But you can definitely tell living here that the country industrialized very, very, very rapidly. Went from being a country at war in the 1950s to now being one of the richest countries in the world. And that combined with the literal American presence of like Protestants, missionaries, like those people came here with the sole purpose of converting Koreans. And it's actually worked quite well. Compared to other countries, the American missionaries had a lot of success converting Koreans. So I think there's kind of this dual conversion to American style capitalism and American style Protestantism.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not Korean or haven't been in Korea, but isn't the Korean work culture also like exceptionally insane where like people are expected to work like 12-hour days just because that's what's expected of them?
I'm not totally sure about the work culture at places other than my workplace, but since I work at a school, I can tell you that the study regimens for these kids are really, really intense.
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise because I read somewhere also that South Korea and Japan have the highest suicide rates in the world. So there you go.
Yeah, and it's coming to be discussed a little bit more, like mental health, stress, how we don't have to devote ourselves entirely to our jobs, but it's still a taboo subject to discuss, especially suicide.
Yeah, oh yeah. That makes sense, yeah.
And it goes back to those articles earlier about the women, quote unquote, dying from falling from their apartments. Like maybe they jumped in a decision to kill themselves. Maybe they were pushed, but it's still taboo to discuss here, as it is in a lot of places, like still in the US. I'm not trying to single out Korea.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely.
That is the story of patient 31 and how one person, perhaps, maybe, accidentally spread the coronavirus throughout Korea.
Yeah, and I hope everyone listening takes good care of themselves and follows precautions. And also just, be safe, stay strong. You're not alone out there. We're here. We're all here with you guys.
We have a new inductee to the Foucault Fuck Cult to our Patreon club. Thank you so much, Alexander Bennett, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for joining. We really appreciate all our supporters. Thanks, Alexander.
If you guys are interested, you can head over to patreon.com/dascriminal to support us financially, and you'll get lots of bonus content in return. You can also follow us on Instagram at dascriminalpod. You can leave us a friendly review over on Apple Podcasts, and just keep listening to the show. Tell your friends.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Until next time.
Bye.